I'm delighted to welcome our speaker today, Rabbi Peter S. Noble, who serves as interim rabbi at Temple Judea in Coral Gables, Florida. He's Rabbi Emeritus at Beth Emet, the Free Synagogue, Evanston, Illinois, and past president of the Central Conference of American Rabbis. Please join me in welcoming Rabbi Peter S. Noble.
Hi, everybody. I'm thrilled to be with you. I feel a little bit challenged. This is really my first webinar. This is my first PowerPoint, and I'm doing this a little bit blind, but hopefully we'll be able to coordinate. I was very honored when Audrey Merwin was kind enough to invite me to do 10 minutes of Torah for the book of Exodus. I found it a great challenge, but it did give me an opportunity to relook at the book. I believe that at least some of what I'm going to say represents a kind of idiosyncratic read of the book of Exodus. But I hope that together we'll learn something and perhaps have a little bit of fun. I want to begin by looking at a quotation from Jack Miles, who wrote a book called God, a Biography. In many ways, this book was perhaps the most influential in getting me to think about the Tanakh in a different way. It was an opportunity to think about the Tanakh as a biography of God, to see this as a sustained story about an important character who we cannot get necessarily to understand philosophically who this God is. I will try to flesh that out in a moment, but I want to read the following quotation. I write here about the life of the Lord God as, and only as, the protagonist of a classic of world literature, namely the Hebrew Bible. But God does have a first and last appearance in the Hebrew Bible. We see him first as the creator outside of history, prior to it, masterfully setting in motion the heavenly bodies by which historical time will be measured. And we see him last as the Ancient of Days, white-haired and silent, looking forward to the end of history from a remote and distant throne. This book becomes a biography of a special sort by dint of its determination to describe the middle that lies between so vigorous a beginning and so quiescent an end. And so I want to look a little bit at this section of the biography of God, and this turns me to think about two ways of doing theology. One is what I describe as narrative theology. Narrative theology, as I understand it, is a theology in which we tell stories about our individual experiences with God and the collective experiences we have as the Jewish people. The systematic theology is the attempt of a single philosopher or a single theologian to tell us exactly what God is. I believe that Judaism is basically a narrative theology. If you take a look at the Tanakh, if you take a look at the Midrash, if you take a look at the Talmud, what we discover is all we have is stories. We do not have a philosophically consistent view of God. On the other hand, if you look at the philosophers, if you look especially at Maimonides, they try to present us with a way of understanding exactly who God is, what God is not, what God does, and what God does not do. I think we can just take one simple example. In the second story of creation, when Adam and Eve have already eaten of the fruit of the tree of knowledge, they discover they're naked, they hide, it's the heat of the day, and God is wandering in the garden and asks, "Where are you?" Now, we can try to interpret that in particular ways, but I think that in point of fact, it just tells us a story about how God might be experienced, and God is certainly not experienced here as a omnipotent or omniscient being. The book of Exodus really is a chapter in God's life. The Israelites transition from the servitude of Pharaoh to the servants of God. God is both the Redeemer and the Revealer, but more importantly, from my perspective, and as I've come to read the book, it is Moses who is also the Redeemer and the Revealer. One of the things that has influenced my own sense of what redemption is all about is the work of Abraham Joshua Heschel, where Heschel makes it clear that God is in need of man. God will not redeem the world alone. Heschel insists, but instead waits for human beings to participate in the work. I have identified two models of redemption. The first model I call the activist model, and the second model I call the quietist model. In general, we have understood the story of Passover. We have understood the book of Exodus as being an activist model. In other words, it is God who does the redeeming. He does the work through miracles. God is the most active element in redemption. There are two other models of redemption that we find in the Tanakh. One is the model of Joseph, where God is not active at all, but Joseph discovers that he has or understands his life as a mission to save his family and to bring them down into Egypt, and understands that what has happened to him is really part of a plan that makes him the key figure in saving his family. The most obvious example, however, is the book of Esther, where God does not appear at all, and where when Haman has condemned the Jews, it is really the action of Mordecai, but mostly the action of Esther, which comes to save the Jewish people. To me, that is an activist model. Outside of the Tanakh, the primary example of the activist model is the story of Hanukkah, in which the Maccabees actually are the instruments of redemption. We know that in many ways the IDF has seen itself as a successor to the Maccabees. However, I want to read the book of Exodus not as a quietist model, but in fact as an activist model. I believe that if we read Exodus as a quietist model, then we sit back and we wait for God to do what God will do in order to redeem us. If, on the other hand, we read the book of Exodus as an activist model of redemption, then it inspires us to actually work to redeem the world. So if we turn to the beginning now of the book of Exodus, to the opening parashah Shemot, we really have a most interesting question, and that question, who is this God? And I have always been fascinated by this notion of God revealing God's name as Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh, which in some ways I'd like to simply translate is I am whatever you need me to be at any particular moment. I am enigmatic. You cannot really know exactly who I am. The best you'll be able to do is to figure out what your relationship is to me when you and I are in contact. In other words, God is this enigmatic character who has personality, who is sometimes present and sometimes absent. And one of the things, of course, which is fascinating is at the beginning of the book of Exodus, God says, look, I've been gone for 400 years. Suddenly I'm waking up. Suddenly I've heard the cry of the Israelites, and I think it's time now for the Israelites to be redeemed. And so he says, Moses, it's your responsibility to redeem the Israelites. Now, one of the things that I've always found particularly fascinating is that God chooses or is not capable of redeeming the Israelites on his own. If I were the God that I learned about in philosophy class, if I were that God who possessed all good qualities to an infinite degree, I would have gone down to Egypt. I would have freed them myself and been done with it. On the other hand, that's not the way God works. God picks out a rather strange character, a character who is resistant to his mission, but who ultimately will accept the task. So as we look at the book of Exodus, we realize that as we go through each of the parshiot, that the God as the divine liberator is one who requires that there be a human messenger that will be the real liberator, in the sense that that person will have accepted or understood themselves to have a particular mission. And so I want to give you here an analogy, and it's an analogy which was important in terms of my own experience of what I might see at some moment as a moment of redemption, a moment in which the Jewish people were threatened, where it seemed almost miraculous that the Jewish people were redeemed. And that goes back to the Six-Day War in 1967. In those days, I was a student at the Hebrew Union College. And in point of fact, what was going on at that moment was a theological question, which was, would God permit a second Shoah, a second Holocaust in our own time? And of course, the answer from the Six-Day War was a resounding no. But if you were alive during that period of time, what you would have seen is a successful foray of the Israel Defense Forces, which were actually the liberator. On the other hand, there was a spiritual component to this, in which people who were there, both in Israel and out of Israel, people on the left and people on the right, who somehow experienced this moment as having a transcendent meaning. And of course, we refer to it as the Six-Day War, which immediately sets it into a kind of theological context. On 6 days, God did all of the work of creation, and on the seventh day, God rested. Now, it's also interesting to note that if you were to look at the events themselves. If you were to turn to the newsreels, if you were to turn to the newspapers, never once do you see any kind of miraculous intervention of God. God doesn't carry the patent tanks up the Golan, that God doesn't stay the Egyptian Air Force. It is, in fact, the Israeli Air Force that, through a preemptive attack, destroys the Egyptian Air Force on the ground. And so it really becomes clear to me that what we're seeing, even within the context of the book of Exodus, that it requires human action for redemption to take place. And so one of the things that I've been thinking about, and that has to do with the whole notion of the plagues and how we understand, especially the last plague, the death of the firstborn. When you think about it, the plagues are a part of a narrative sequence, an increasingly severe set of circumstances, each of which is supposed to convince Pharaoh to let the people go. In point of fact, we have 10 examples in which Pharaoh decides to let them go and has a change of heart. We have 10 examples of God hardening Pharaoh's heart. It is a monumental contest between two figures who see themselves as a god. But it reminds me very much about the way in which we perhaps understand how revolutions begin. And that revolutions often begin because the ruling power is such that it allows its people to suffer to a point where that suffering gets so great that redemption can no longer be resisted. I was thinking as I was preparing today for this seminar that if we begin to think about what is happening in the world, and if we begin to think about Syria, and if we begin to think about the Ukraine, in some ways we might analogize that to what happened in Egypt according to the Torah, that the situation is getting increasingly severe. The ruling power is increasingly oppressive, and at that point there is a revolution. That revolution requires a leader. Sometimes it requires several leaders. It requires the people to be awakened by those leaders, and those leaders to be given to give the people the courage that they need in order to actually participate in their own redemption. What I'd like to do at the moment, I've been talking for about 15 minutes, and I'd like to pause for a moment and see if there are any questions.
Okay.
Again, feel free to raise your hand.
We do have a question. It is, how does God need us today? And I think you've been speaking a little bit about this.
Well, my own view, and my own view is colored by the period of time in which I grew up. I grew up really in the 60s and the 70s, at the height of the civil rights movement, at the height of the anti-war movement, when, especially within Reform Judaism, we were still very much involved in what we called prophetic Judaism, and the sense that we could not wait for God to change the world, that we had to be change agents, that in some sense we knew what God wanted, we knew what kind of a world God would prefer, but that couldn't happen without individuals who would stand up. And as many of you know, Martin Luther King became, in a certain sense, a kind of Moses figure, who was able to galvanize a movement. And then there were many very brave rabbis, many of them in the South, who joined in that movement. And we had a sense that we were, in some sense, trying to lead the United States out of Egypt, that we were trying to get to a promised land, to actualize the promise of America. And as I think about our current situation in the world today, there is, at least in America, it seems to me, a tremendous quietism. And there's a tremendous quietism, I find, in the American Jewish community, and especially since it's the community I know best, it's the Reform community. We're very good at Gemilut Chasadim. We're very good at doing deeds of loving kindness. But it seems to me that except perhaps for a few people and for the Religious Action Center, we have been unable to galvanize our people to fight the injustices in our society. So I believe that we are not going to be able to serve God unless we step up today. I think God wants us to step up today and to follow the model that is put forth, for example, in the Exodus from Egypt, where we will free ourselves from the various kinds of bondage that we find our people in.
Thank you. We have another question. Where was God during the 400 years prior to the Exodus? And why did he or she return?
Well, that's a really good question, and it's a question that I've tried to ponder. And one of the things I suspect is that sometimes, first of all, I think God's absence is very difficult to explain. But I think that what happens is we somehow are not allowing God to be present. We're not listening. We're not, as the I remember the old quotation, "Where is God? Any place you will let God in." So my feeling is that in some sense God is always there, but that we, for lots of reasons, fail to perceive the possibility of our interaction with God, and it's not so much that God is absent, but that we're not present to God.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
So let me continue now for a moment. One of the passages which very much, I think, in some ways confirms what I'm trying to point out is the fact that at the Reed Sea, when the army of Pharaoh is about to catch up with them, Moses cries out to the Lord. Moses cries out to God. And God's response, I think, is wonderfully enigmatic. God says, why do you cry out to me? Tell the Israelites to go forward, and you lift up your rod and hold out your arm over the sea and split it so that the Israelites may march into the sea on dry ground. And to me, this is really one of those great passages. God seems to be saying, stop whining. Get out there and do something. Get your feet wet. And of course, all of us know, and all of us have quoted the Midrash, which talks about Nachshon, that in point of fact, the waters didn't split, that there was a kind of debate as to who should go forward first. And while that debate is taking place, Nachshon from the tribe of Benjamin, the youngest of the tribes, jumps into the water, and only then does the sea split. And so when we see this, it again reminds us that redemption comes, change comes, not strictly by God's action, but in some sense almost God's reaction to what we are doing. My friend and classmate and teacher, Rabbi Larry Kushner, reminds us that in some sense each of us are God's representatives, or we're God's shlichim. Each of us are malachim. Each of us are angels, divine messengers who have the ability to connect heaven and earth and to transform the world. And it seems to me, once again, it is an affirmation of Judaism as a activist tradition, not a quietist tradition, that we do not wait for God to do it, that we can, we must take the initial steps ourselves. Which again turns me now to that wonderful climactic moment in Exodus, Parashat Yitro, and one of the wonderful things about Parashat Yitro is if you look at the introduction to Matan Torah, it's one of the most confused passages in all of the Torah. Moses is running up and down. God is giving instructions and repeating the instructions. And finally, Moses tells God, well, you already gave us the instruction. The people can't break forth because you already told them, et cetera, et cetera. Now, on one level, one might think that this is a bad literary editing. But I have come to believe that actually it's a genius of editing. That in point of fact, the editor said, I don't know quite how to explain this moment. Was it a volcanic eruption? Was it a thunderstorm? What was going on here? Well, it was a little bit of this, it was a little bit of that. There was a great deal of tumult. There was the sound of the shofar. And then it says, Moses spoke, and God answered him bakol, answered him with thunder, with a voice. So God's revelation here, interestingly, is reactive again. It is reactive to Moses's attempt to reach out. And then what we begin to see is out of this tumult, out of this confusion, we have the beginning of the birth of Torah as text. And so one of the things that really happens here is that we begin a conversation. The conversation is articulated then in language which we speak about as though it were the actual word of God. I have always liked Franz Rosenzweig's basic notion that revelation is Vayered Adonai, God descends, and Vayedaber is already human interpretation. In fact, Judaism is an ongoing conversation about the meaning of the events at Sinai. It is often a raucous debate. It is that which keeps our tradition alive. And remarkably, we in this day and age live at a period of time when almost every one of our most important sacred texts are available to us in translation. And what emerges then from Sinai is a series of laws. So mishpatim, which are often called rules, are a series of translating that primary experience into a set of ways of living. And what we discover in Judaism and what we discover in law in general is there is an interplay between law and narrative, an interplay between halakha and agadah. Most of you probably know the famous essay Halakha of Agadah by Chaim Nachman Bialik, where he describes halakha as the crystallization and the inevitable quintessence of Agadah, and Agadah is the content of halakha. And in a very famous and well commented on article by the 20th century Yale law professor Robert Cover in an essay called Nomos, a Narrative, he says there is no set of legal institutions or prescriptions that exist apart from the narratives and locate them and give them meaning. And when we think about how law functions and what law means and how law is interpreted, in point of fact, what we do is we locate that law within the context of narrative. So, for example, as we began to see the Exodus from Egypt as being the primary example and primary paradigm of liberation, we began to look at those laws in our society that, in fact, were in some sense oppressive. Reform Judaism actually did exactly the same thing when it declared that the distinction between men and women in terms of their rights as Jews and their participation in the Jewish community represented an oppressive notion. We picked up, of course, on the notion that each of us is created b'tselem Elohim, but it was, in fact, the primary liberation narrative that causes us to interpret. It is interesting to note that something similar happens as we move to the GLBT community, and that we make an effort to understand the meaning of law in the context of the stories which form our views of the world. In addition, the various agadot that we find in the Talmud often provide us with a perspective that gives us the opportunity to rethink the meaning of a particular halakha. So, for example, one of the things that I have done is I've used the story of the martyrdom of Hananiah ben Tradion as an example of how, under extreme duress, it is appropriate to have assisted death. It changed my own view of whether active euthanasia would, in fact, be permitted. So let me stop there for a moment and see if there are any other questions.
Yeah, we have a question. If we want to follow the activist model, what are some actions that we can take or behaviors we can adopt so that we can be in conversation with God?
Well, I think for me, the starting point is, quite frankly, the texts of our people, the sacred texts of our people. And then to have those be part and parcel of a communal conversation which galvanizes the community around issues that create a just, compassionate, egalitarian society, that work to end violence and war, that causes our synagogues to be places of ferment and debate and activism. It's hard to be an activist by oneself. We can find some examples of people who have the strength, the courage, the passion to step out by themselves. But my experience is that we need a community to support us, to give us courage, to help us clarify our ideas. And again, when I was in youth group many, many years ago, I remember a song we used to sing, which is 1 + 1 makes a million. So my sense is that one of the things we really need to do is we really very much need to begin these conversations and find a community that will, in fact, inspire us.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Other questions?
I don't see any right now. Okay.
So I want to move from this a little bit further and talk about, in point of fact, about leadership and faith. So we come now to the story of the golden calf, certainly one which is really known well by all of us. And the very fact Moses goes up on the top of the mountain, delays in coming back, 40 days and 40 nights, in spite of everything that our ancestors experienced, back to the idols. And one of the things, of course, which fascinates me about this passage is what happens when you have weak leadership. And it's interesting that Aaron demonstrates weak leadership. He did not have the capacity to help the people deal with the fact that Moses was absent, and he didn't have the faith to understand that to try to represent a invisible God was a grave error. And so he takes the easy way out, in my view, and he provides the people with what they want rather than what the people need. And of course, this is all known on Mount Sinai, and what happens next is God gets into a real tizzy, and basically says, Moses, leave me alone, let me destroy the people, and you and I are going to start all over again. And then Moses responds to God saying, first of all, it's going to really be bad for your reputation. And secondly, my fate is tied up with my people, and without them, you don't have me. And this is, quite frankly, an example of ultimately speaking truth to power. But it's also an example of how this narrative theology plays itself out. God here is portrayed as an angry deity, one who can and needs propitiation by human leadership, and that when we have great leadership, then in point of fact, we will be able to do what we need to do. And so I have always found both God's extreme anger here, and in some sense God being propitiated through playing to his ego, as being a bit problematic. But again, if we look through the many, many narratives that we have which describe God, we find that God is experienced, at least, as a character who is capable of sadness, is capable of anger, is capable of great compassion, is capable of putting forth amazing, important ways of our thinking about who we ought to be and what our lives are. And at the same time, what we discover is that what we know about God is not something abstract. We don't know that being which possesses all good qualities to an infinite degree, but we have not even a concept of God. We have what I would describe as a relationship with God. But the whole question of faith is really problematic. It was problematic for Moses. It was problematic for Aaron. It was problematic for the Jewish people. And it is not surprising that the Jewish tradition, as it develops, prefers actually not to define God, but to tell stories, to find ways to relate. The only time I think we do systematic theology rather than narrative theology is when we feel a necessity of explaining ourselves to ourselves, or when we are challenged from the outside and we need to explain ourselves to other people. So I now want to turn to the Mishkan, and I want to talk a little bit about the Mishkan, Shabbat, opening the doors to God's presence, and how that relates to us today. We're aware that in Pikudei, which is the last of the Parshiot, that the commandment on no, actually, I'm sorry, at Vayakel, that the commandment to cease work and build no fires on Shabbat seems to be almost an interruption in the narrative of building the Mishkan. And of course, our rabbinic commentators understood that as the basis for prohibiting 39 categories of work on Shabbat. But as we take a look at both the Mishkan and Shabbat, they're both opportunities for sanctification. Now, Abraham Joshua Heschel famously writes, Judaism is a religion of time, aiming at the sanctification of time. Judaism teaches us to attach holiness in time, to be attached to sacred events, to learn how to consecrate sanctuaries that emerge from the magnificent stream of the year. Sabbaths are our great cathedrals. Our Holy of Holies is the shrine that neither the Romans nor the Germans were able to burn, a shrine that even apostasy cannot obliterate. Well, it's a beautiful, beautiful statement, and it's, of course, written in some sense in the wake of the destruction of European Jewry. And, of course, the sanctification of time reminds us that Judaism is portable, that we can take time with us always. It reminds us that Judaism is portable because we have the Torah, which we can carry with us as well. But in point of fact, the sanctification of time is only one aspect of what we are and what we need. So we do need a certain kind of sanctification of space. And the Mishkan provides us with the notion that we do need places that we can gather, places that are in fact designated as opportunities for God to be present. Now, obviously, we can pray anywhere. We can create, if you will, a Mishkan almost out of anything. But here, what we are reminded of is that when God created the world, God completed that creation with chokhmah, skill, tavuna, understanding or ability, and da'at, knowledge, that when the Mishkan was completed, Bezalel used the same characteristics. The building of the world and the building of the Mishkan require the same characteristics. We and God share those same characteristics. We have the opportunity, as God built a place for us, we have an opportunity to build a place for God. And it seems to me that in point of fact, what we're being told is that the world is God's gift to us, that we then create a dwelling place for God, which is our gift to God, which is a way of inviting God into our world and into our lives. And then at the end of Pikudei, we're told that when the Mishkan is complete, the presence of God would in fact enter the Mishkan, and that it blocked out Moses, and that the people had to remain there until God lifted from there and they could continue their journey. And one of the things that I have thought about is the importance of Shabbat and the importance of finding a place to have God present, something which we call spirituality today, and that is a very, very important thing. But when we are completely immersed in sacred time, or we're completely in God's presence, it is impossible for us to do what we need to do to change the world. So that Shabbat comes as a time of respite, a time of appreciation, a time of gathering our resources, spiritual resources, so that we can go out and we can create the kind of world which continues to invite God's presence. And at the same time, by building institutional religion, which I see as the Mishkan, and where we have created like Mishkan Tefillah, a place, dwelling place for prayer. Institutional religion then is the place that we can actually be inspired to carry out what I believe is the message of the book of Exodus, and that message is that God can't do it alone, that God wants us to be God's partners in redeeming the world, and that in point of fact, we will never exactly know what God is in God's own essence, that God will always be, in some sense, Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh, but in a real sense, it is our ongoing encounters with God, telling the stories and doing the deeds, which in point of fact is the message of the book of Exodus. So this brings us almost to the end. I wonder whether there are any further questions.
Yes, there are a number of questions. First, we have one about the building of the Mishkan and the golden calf. How can we connect the collection of gold for the golden calf with the latter collection of gold and other valuables for the Mishkan, now under Adonai's auspices?
I think that the issue is, how do we use our resources? Do we use our resources to build things that become idols, to build things that we worship which are not God? Or do we gather our resources to create the kind of places that encourage us to be involved with God and to live out God's purposes? I think that, at least for me, the message of the building of the Mishkan is not so much its opulence, but the generosity of the people who saw that they had a mission, and that they were so generous that eventually Moses has to say to them, enough already. You brought more than we can possibly use. And I think the idea here is that a trumah, which is supposed to be a gift to God, is what we really want to do, is we really want to inspire people who will give willingly, who will find that what we are offering and that what our mission is, and I like that old word mission from classical reform, is so worthy that we will devote generously considerable resources to doing that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. We have another question. It's about the conception of God. The question is, the conception of God as omnipotent and omniscient has had incredible staying power over the centuries. But that same longevity means that many people continue to say, I don't believe in God, because they don't conceive of the word as meaning that old conception. So particularly for young children who participate in religious school and hear God spoken of in that way, do you think there's any way we can change that or reduce that conception and promote a much different or more complex conception of God?
That's a great question. I actually believe that what we need to do is we need to use a great number of different metaphors as we think about God. Our tradition provides a lot of those metaphors. I mean, you have Makom, you have Makor Chaim, you have Shekhinah, you have Father, you have potentially Mother. I also think that we ought to be using gendered terms for God, sometimes masculine, sometimes feminine. We ought to use terms that grow out of the stories we tell. I do believe that the word God has been tainted because it contains that image of, in some sense, the old man sitting on a throne. And I don't think you break down those stereotypes without, in point of fact, using multiple metaphors. If I have one regret about Mishkan Tefillah, which many of you know I was very much involved in, I wish we had used more metaphors. I wish we had used gendered language, because I think it would have helped people to understand things differently. I once had a very interesting experience. I was walking through the congregation that I had served for 30 years, and I saw a young child, and the mother said to her child, do you know who this is? And the little girl said, no, I don't. And she said, oh, this is Rabbi Noble. And the little girl, who was maybe 4 or 5, said, gee, I didn't know that men could be rabbis. And I said, gee, that was really a success. In other words, having role models, having different ways of conceiving God are particularly helpful. And I find that the narrative language and concrete language is helpful in breaking down those stereotypes, and also telling stories, telling not only the stories out of our tradition, but the moments that we as individuals may have felt close to God.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And as a follow-up to that, why do you speak of God in anthropomorphic terms?
I find that that's the best way for me to deal with it. I have come to the conclusion at this stage of my life, after having tried to do systematic theology, I believe that I could someday find the unified field theory of theology. I thought that I really would be able to put God in a little bit of a box. But I discovered every time I thought I put God in a box, somehow God seemed to surprise me. And so I have found that, at least for me, the best way for me to speak about God is in terms of relationship. And the only kind of relationships that I really know and really understand are human relationships. And so for me, anthropomorphic language provides a way of describing what is, for me, one of the most important relationships in my life.
And I think this next question really follows very well from that answer, which is, why do you speak of God as wanting things from us?
Well, I believe that at the core of the universe, which is what I would describe as God, there are, and this is I learned from my father when I was a very young child, who really didn't believe in God, but believed that there was something in the universe that demanded that each of us be a mensch. And I believe that our tradition has been able to tap into resources and sources which suggest that at the core of the universe there is a demand for us to complete, repair, perfect the world. And I think that many of the texts of our people tap into that ultimate reality. And that, so for me, I hear in the voices of the prophets, I see in the narrative of the Exodus from Egypt, the narrative of creation, the narrative of Revelation, that there are ways of tapping into that there is a demand for human dignity and the demand for human freedom, and that's what I would describe as what God demands of us.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you very much, Rabbi. I think we've come to the end of our time. So again, we want to thank Rabbi Peter S. Noble for his time and for his wisdom. And thank you all for joining the webinar. And Adam, can you tell us if the webinar will be available for people who didn't see the whole thing or who want to, take another look?
Yes, the webinar will be available on the URJ's YouTube channel. If you search for the URJ Union for Reform Judaism on YouTube, you'll be able to navigate to our YouTube channel and find this webinar, and you can watch it at your convenience. And with that, we'll close the webinar, and we'll hopefully have another one coming up on the schedule in the coming months, and we hope you'll join us for that as well.